From my limited research, it seemed like most of the sightings, the first thing that they notice is something on the ground that then takes flight, as opposed to something that's passing overhead.
Right. And sandhill cranes, their legs are like sticks. So you wouldn't look at a sandhill crane and think, that's a guy.
You've never seen my legs, Bob.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Mondo Freako.
Hey everybody, welcome to what we're calling the Mondo Freako Basement Tapes, the raw experimental conversations that actually sparked our show.
What you're about to hear is Rob and me riffing on all kinds of things. Bigfoot, alien visitations, shadow people, Mothman, whatever, before Mondo Freako was even a thing.
Think of it as a peek behind the curtain of where it all began.
Enjoy. We're going to talk about Bigfoot.
No.
Was that correct?
We did discuss Bigfoot, but we had decided we were going to talk about the Mothman.
Oh, the Mothman. I'm sorry. I had Bigfoot in my head.
Any cryptid will do, but...
Any cryptid, yeah. The Mothman, though, is fascinating because I've actually been to Point Pleasant.
Have you?
Yes.
Before or after
been
they put
to the
up the
Mothman statue. Mm-hmm.
Oh, there we go. I was actually born in West Virginia and lived there for 13 years. And when I was 2 years old is when the whole thing started, right? So in 66.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 66, 67 is when the whole thing started. And there are actually two sightings. I've been doing a little bit of research in preparation for our conversation, just so I could kind of sound like I knew what I was talking about.
Okay.
But there are a couple of sightings in my hometown, St. Albans, West Virginia, less than a mile from where my house was. So when I was 2 years old, whatever I was doing as a 2-year-old, a couple of folks supposedly saw something that resembled what was being seen around the Point Pleasant area.
Mm-hmm.
I actually sent a text out to my siblings and said, "Hey, anybody, you remember this?"
Yeah.
No one responded, so I'm assuming that means no.
They're like, we're not talking about that. That's interesting because there was a lot of sightings of the Mothman in that time period, right? So there's a whole book called the Mothman Prophecies that talks
John
about
Keel.
John Keel, that talks about all the sightings, and not only that, but the other weirdness that happened during that time period and afterwards as well.
Yep.
But go ahead.
I was going to say that I did not realize until a couple of days ago that there was actually Men in Black, quote unquote, sightings around that time as well. And
some of the first Men in Black sightings, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think they coined the term, but I think that that was, for popular culture, it was some of the more known sightings of Men in Black. Yeah.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. You can tell me whether they're interesting or not, but Point Pleasant was actually not the first place that they suspect the sighting was. There were 5 guys digging a grave in a town called Clendenin, which is actually closer to St. Albans than Point Pleasant, that supposedly saw a brown winged humanoid take flight from a tree by where they were digging.
Yeah.
That was, I think, a day or two before the one that's on the Mothman specials about the 2 couples in the car that first sighted it.
Yeah, they drove really fast back into town from the TNT area. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the ex-munitions storage place.
Yeah. Well, when I went to visit, I went there. I went to the TNT area and I went into the bunkers. We walked through the TNT area and looked at several of the bunkers and also found the old power plant location, which is not there anymore.
Okay.
But did go see where it was as well. And the road that obviously has changed over time, but the road that leads back into town from there where the folks had their encounter. Yeah, it really is interesting. And one of the things that the naysayers, if you will, it was a sandhill crane, right? And when you're in the TNT area, now it's a nature preserve. And there are cranes there, and you'll see them if you go wandering around in that area, but they're not, they're big for birds.
Yeah.
But they're not humanoid big.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
Now, but I will tell you though, and this has nothing to do with my time there. Here, my house, I live out in the country a bit, and we have cranes. We have a lake, and that's nearby, and cranes. And when they go overhead during the day, they cast a very large shadow, and it kind of freaks you out every once in a while. Several times I've been outside, doing yard work or whatever the hell I'm doing, and they go overhead, and it's like, what the hell was that?
Right. And from my limited research, it seemed like most of the sightings, the first thing that they notice is something on the ground that then takes flight, as opposed to something that's passing overhead.
Right. And sandhill cranes, their legs are like sticks. You know what I mean? They don't have any substantive leg muscles.
Right.
So you wouldn't look at a sandhill crane and think, that's a guy.
You've never seen my legs, Bob, so you never know. I've got 10 legs.
And so you said you lived there until you were like 15 or whatever.
13, yeah.
13. And so, was this something in the lore of the area?
I was trying to think back. I was very much aware of the term the Mothman, but I don't know necessarily where I first picked that up. I know my mom was a big sci-fi reader. When I was growing up, we had a collection of all these books, and there were some cryptid type titles there as well. So it's possible that maybe I picked something out of the library and the bookcase where she kept all this stuff and sort of familiarized myself with it. Or maybe I picked up something that was on, one of those half-hour shows that used to be on when I was younger, did a special on Mothman. In Search Of, yeah, maybe there was an In Search Of episode, but I was aware of it. I was aware it was Point Pleasant related, but I think when I was in West Virginia, it wasn't top of mind for me there. I never actually even put two and two together. It was, I think, after I had left to move to Chicago that I really said, oh my gosh, that was actually in my home state. Yeah,
you're just mining coal and trying to make a living.
Exactly. Right. They put me out in the mine when I was 2.5. So
that's right. Hey, he's walking. Time to go to work.
Uh-huh.
So the reason I went there was my son was interested, and I'm interested as well. I don't want to put it upon him like, oh, I went because he wanted to go. I wanted to go as well. We were both interested in these kind of phenomena, and he was at an age like in his teens, like 13, 14, and he said, he would like to go there. I said, well, let's just go. Right. So we went on a little long weekend thing to see it. And Point Pleasant really embraced the Mothman. And I find that fascinating because Point Pleasant's not a happening town. It's not got like a lot of industry or anything. And so the Mothman aspect of things really is an industry now there.
Yep.
And they've embraced it, and they have a statue, and there's a museum, which we went to and everything. And they have a festival each year and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of plaques about the Mothman in relation to the town and the things that happened. Whereas we went to, there's a place called Van Meter, Iowa, which is another flying cryptid. And it was called the Van Meter Visitor. And we went on another trip, a long weekend trip, to go see where the Van Meter Visitor was, and they didn't even want to talk about it. I mean, we literally talked to people. I asked people in the town while we were there, because we were looking for there was a brickyard is where it was seen at originally. And we wanted to find the brickyard. And I asked some people, we went to City Hall and asked about it because they had a little museum for like a local baseball player who made it big in the big leagues at some point in time. And they were open. So I went in there and we went to the baseball thing. And then I said, hey, you know about that Van Meter Visitor? And they're like, no. And and we went to the library. It was almost as if they purposefully were denying everything. It was the weirdest trip that we've been on. And it was really creepy because we went into like a gas station, same thing. Visitor, I don't know what you're talking about. Yet they are known for this thing. And it was the turn of the century. And it was sighted by all the people in town, and they shot at it. So like the town, the mayor and the doctor and all these uppity people in town chased this thing to the brickyard area, and it went down in a shaft because they were mining clay, and it disappeared down this shaft. The town's not very big, but we drove all over town, and we did find where the brickyard used to be. And don't tell anybody, but I have a piece of brick from the Van Meter visitor area.
Impressive.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, that is kind of strange.
Afterwards, I found out they have a festival.
Okay, that's interesting.
But that's the weird, and I don't know if it's somebody from outside that does the festival or something, and this brings it to town. But back to Point Pleasant and the Mothman, they love it, and I find that fascinating. You should look it up if you like this kind of stuff. The Van Meter Visitor is a fascinating story. It's not like the Mothman where it has multiple sightings. The Visitor happened, I think, across 3 nights at the turn of the century, but everybody in town knew about it, and they were trying to kill it. And it was a big thing at that point in time. And then it went down the hole and then never was seen again. But the Mothman has been seen multiple times. Why don't you tell us, what was his most famous thing?
So the story that gets the most attention is a couple of couples. This is the part that's always puzzled me. It's almost midnight on a night, and there's a couple of couples driving around near the old munitions plants. I don't know why they were there at that time of night.
They were getting it on. Come on, Rob. That's what
I guess they're already married. As far as I do,
they needed to get out in the open air. I don't know.
I guess maybe they needed some air, needed to get away from the kids, and decided to go out together.
There was a lot more drinking and driving back in those days.
Right.
And then everybody
no seatbelts.
Beat it out. Yeah, no seatbelts. A lot of drinking, a lot of driving.
Yep.
Nowadays, that's also frowned upon. Back then, I mean, it was major points if you were out drinking and driving. Oh, you're cool.
So they're out there practicing their drinking and driving skills, maybe when the roads are a little more clear.
Fooling around.
So anyway, they're driving down this road, and I guess the headlights show on what they have described as a 6 to 7 foot humanoid form. And depending on, I actually read the police reports because I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive, but they talk about how they believe the headlights sort of illuminated the eyes, which had a bit of a reddish glow to them when the headlights hit it. But they said that it appeared to have these large wings folded on its back. It was a grayish color. And as soon as the headlights hit it, they saw it run into, I believe, one of the buildings. And obviously, Bob, you have some knowledge here too, so correct me because I've been.
The power station, I think, or one of the buildings near the power station. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess they decided that. Did they pursue it into the building, or did they just turn around and start going the other direction?
I think they did, and because the power station was crumbling at that point. It was one of the many places in the United States during World War II where they made munitions. At the end of the war, all this stuff gets abandoned. And so it was very much in disrepair. Parts of the building were collapsing and so forth, my understanding.
And so
they chased him in there, though, and put the light on him, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And then at some point they determined this was a bad idea, and they started trying to run away in their car. And then apparently the creature started pacing them, and they said they were getting close to 100 miles per hour in their car. And this thing was, quote unquote, gliding above them as they were traveling along the road. Yeah. It freaked them out enough where they actually went and both of the couples filed the police reports with the Point Pleasant Police Department, which seems to be, especially if they're out drinking and driving, that doesn't sound like a real good idea, unless they actually did experience something.
That's the interesting thing is they did. And I think the police even did a cursory drive out to check out things.
I think it was one of the officers that speculated that maybe it was a sandhill crane, but they did go out based on the reports to see what might be going on there.
You have, like you said, 4 people who witnessed this and then were chased and, obviously scared. I think if I recall, when they went into the power plant, they had a flashlight and they shined it up. It was like, a multi-story opening, and it was perched up on a beam. And that's when they totally flipped out and took off running because this thing was up high, right? There's no stairs, right?
Right.
It had got up on this beam and it was rather large and kind of menacing. They flipped out and took off. People have sightings of Bigfoot or any other cryptid. You want to say Loch Ness Monster, Champ in New York. But you have so many of them. Everybody puts them down. They say, oh, it could be this, it could be that. I mean, everybody can't be wrong, can they? That's what I always think.
To me, I can't see a lot of motives for these folks to do what they did.
Right,
So
and then this isn't the age of that. There's no Haktui phenomenon that's happening back then where it's like, hey, you go out and see something crazy and tell everybody you're going to be popular. You're going to get paid to go to drink at bars. None of that happened back then, you know? It basically just becomes a cool story that you could tell your friends or not, depending on how you're portrayed as a loony or something.
Right.
The funny thing about all these tales is I think really pre-90s, right? So pre-internet, so pre-95, 97, those have to be more credible because there's nowhere for you to go. Once the internet happened, there's an outlet for everyone, like we're doing right now. But pre-internet, what's your outlet? You're going to make a zine about it? You know what I mean? The outlets are much, much smaller. And so then the reason to do it becomes smaller. You have to be really, really dedicated person to want to do something at that level.
Yes. The motivation is to not be truthful back then were substantially fewer than what the benefits one might get today should they choose to try to spread some story that may or may not be true. It cracks me up when folks claim something doesn't exist because there's no current proof that it does.
Right. There's no body or bones. That means it doesn't. Yeah. I didn't see my grandfather's bones, but I know he died.
My one brother, who's very analytical, he's one of the folks that think, well, obviously by now there'd be a picture because everyone's carrying a camera in their pocket, essentially.
But there is. The Chicago sightings, they have pictures.
Right. Yeah. More so than they did in West Virginia, yes.
Yeah. And see, I don't think that's true because I still have yet to get a picture of a good accident, and they happen constantly.
That's exactly right. Unless you're literally going out looking to experience. And that's not what a lot of the witnesses are doing, right? People do go Bigfoot hunting, as you know. They've got their cameras and they're ready to go. But if you're out there doing something else and suddenly you run across a Mothman, for example, the last thing you're probably going to think of in that instance, they can't wait to get a picture of this. Yeah,
well, like tonight, a drone flew over my house and I didn't get a picture of it. But I can tell you a drone flew over my house. I saw it and I told my son, hey, look out the window. You can see a drone coming over the house. And he saw it too. But I didn't get a picture because I was watching the movie and, and looked out the window and happened to see this thing coming off over the trees. Even though we all have phones in our pockets, we're not all trigger happy taking pictures constantly.
Right. And I'm mostly just trying to unlock the damn thing half the time, even though it's falling out of my hand. So yeah, I couldn't even imagine getting a picture of Mothman should he determine to show himself.
I always make fun of my wife because she's so slow to take a picture. We have cats and she's always taking pictures of the cats. And then she gets mad because they stop doing the cute thing by the time she gets her camera app going. And I always laugh. I'm like, you really got to practice or something. You're so slow. You're never going to get a picture of these cats doing what you want.
My personal favorite is when you think you're taking a video and you go back to look at it and you get a blurry still because you pressed the wrong button initially.
Back to the Mothman, the other big thing is the Silver Bridge collapse.
Yeah.
And that is what I think a lot of people, how they know Mothman is because it's a harbinger of doom. Right.
Some people are connecting the two. I'm not sure I buy into that theory, but yes, it happened soon after the sightings. And then the Richard Gere movie that came out, apparently that was the climax of the film. So it kind of tied the two together, at least in the folks' minds.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, the Silver Bridge collapse was on Christmas time. I think it was Christmas Eve. And a lot of traffic going back and forth and the freezing temperatures, obviously, in that time of year.
December 15th.
December 15th. So it was Christmas time. But some people said they saw him on top of the bridge. Now, there is a picture of the Mothman on the bridge, but it's a faked picture, I believe. But yeah, he was there. I can't remember how far in advance of the collapse, but he was there, I think hours. I don't think it was like a day or two. I think it was literally hours, supposedly.
Well, you've heard that he was supposedly seen around Chernobyl and the Twin Towers as well. Now,
Correct.
I don't know.
Supposedly, yeah.
Supposedly, yes.
But
and is there,
so then why don't we believe? We both were very skeptical of that.
Yeah.
Why? Why are we buying into him being in Point Pleasant? Chernobyl, there's no effing way he was in Chernobyl.
I guess I see that as a tenuous connection. I don't think it's fair to the Mothman, Bob, to associate him as being a harbinger of doom. I'm protective of this cryptid in that regard. And so I think it was a bit of a copycat.
Do you have the plushie? Because they do have a plushie Mothman you can buy.
I don't. I always assumed he was a lot more moth-like. But the more I read, like the eyewitness accounts, well, they're very humanoid. Like they say, actually a human head, and all the cool-looking plushies that I see kind of have the rounded torso with the eyes kind of on the top of the chest. Mm. So yeah, if I were to get one of those, I wouldn't feel I was being anatomically accurate with most of the descriptions of the Mothman. But no, not that much of a fan.
It just jumped into my head as we were talking. It's like, why are we so convicted that this happened as opposed to that? And I do agree. I think that those were much later happenings, right? And then and we get into the territory that we just described as being a little more prone to placing things there for some kind of attention, as opposed to these people who were, minding their own business, having a good time one night and being chased by this creature. I think it's people trying to perpetuate the myth a little bit is my thought as well.
And I'll also submit to you the more recent sightings of a similar creature in the Chicago area that I'm sure.
How old is this Mothman? He's really got to be up there at this point.
Well, and he's been sighted around Chicago, I believe, since 2011-ish.
Yeah, 2011.
And I'm not sure what he's foretelling in terms of significant disasters, but there's not been much going on there.
Cubs losing. Cubs kept losing. And then he left for a couple of years, and then they won.
Maybe that's what he went to Chernobyl.
If we move from West Virginia to Chicago, totally different setting, right? So West Virginia, very, very rural. It's a city, not in the sense of San Fran, but Chicago is a big, big, big city. Yeah. If everybody applies their prejudices accordingly, in West Virginia, they see the Mothman because they're a bunch of backwoods people. In Chicago, they're cultured. They're not going to see the Mothman. But here we go. And we have, fairly I've seen pictures, supposedly not faked pictures. At least no one has purposefully manipulated them. And it's in the city.
Yeah, and there's actually a Mothman sightings map. And I guess there's over 300 reports, and there's a couple of guys who are collecting and plotting these out on maps. They consider they have 170 credible accounts since it started in 2011 of folks who have reported seeing a creature like that.
But that's interesting to me because in that area in West Virginia, the population density is so much lower. So the chances of seeing something are so much lower. Where in Chicago, the population density is so much higher that there's people out 24 hours a day doing something. Mm-hmm. Where in Point Pleasant, everybody probably goes to bed. These people who were out driving around drinking at midnight or whatever were not the norm. They were the minority at that point in time. So it's interesting that would happen. And the fact that in Chicago, there's big buildings and everything. And so this thing is not flying at 10,000 feet. It's flying at the height of buildings. Point Pleasant, I think 4 stories. I don't remember seeing anything more than 4 or 5 stories, honestly. It's a totally different thing. I think Mothman is a great name because of alliteration, Mothman, but it's a poor name as a descriptor. And now they're applying it to any flying humanoid is a Mothman. The Chicago one, I don't think anybody's had a super, super close encounter with it to describe it the way that they did in West Virginia, in Point Pleasant.
I'm trying to think back as the sightings that I looked into. I've been doing a bit of a summary, and I'm using artificial intelligence, Bob. We've had a conversation about that as well, to help me streamline all these sources and help me distill down some of the information. And I
Man,
asked for
you're prepared.
yeah, I will. It's
I didn't even write down. I wrote down in my head Bigfoot.
I think they reported in some instances red eyes as well in some of the Chicago sightings. And the overall characteristics that span the majority of the sightings, both in West Virginia and Chicago, were tall, 6 to 7 feet, humanoid, dark gray or dark in color, and then red eyes almost all the time.
Right.
Those are
okay.
kind of the things that
so
float
the
to the
descriptions are somewhat similar. Let me ask you this. We're calling it a cryptid. So far, we've been talking as an animal of some kind, right? Mothman. Alien? What do you think? Could it just be a kind of alien that's just visiting and he's like, hey, I'd love to see what's going on in downtown Chicago?
When you say alien, do you mean not of the Earth? Or do you mean not of this dimension?
Either one.
People
totally alien to our area.
I guess I have a hard time thinking, especially because of the urban setting of Chicago, that it's just some sort of a human creature that's taken up roost in some of the buildings in the Chicago skyline, right? So I'm going to go with something that's probably not by the standard animal. It's not a wayward flying humanoid that just happens to be able to live in Chicago. It's either coming in from some of the more wooded areas of the city or suburbs. And if it's attracted to the lights of the skyline, maybe there are some moth tendencies to see some of the lights of the buildings. But
I think, to me, though, it is just as likely that it could be some other type of life form, interdimensional or otherwise, that is just taking in the sights. Some people like to go camping and some people like to go to the city. And there you go. And when you travel, you may do both. If it's like more of a species as opposed to an individual, that would explain the span of time and the different locations. That's always the thing with Bigfoot, is there's a certain group of folks who think it's just one. It is a Bigfoot, right? And there's nothing that's just one, typically. It's very, very rare to have a one of something. And so that's why I think the Mothman, whether it's an animal or something else, there's not one Mothman. There's multiple.
Tie a couple of loose thread theories together. There are some who feel that what we perceive as extraterrestrials or aliens are actually folks that have figured out time travel in the future. Maybe the Mothman, the flying humanoid, is simply a way in which someone who has the ability to time travel is able to survey areas less detected and more efficiently than walking on foot.
Yeah,
as the moth
or
flies,
maybe they are alien snowboarders. You know what I mean? There's a special breed of person. It's like, dude, I love to fly around. I'm going to get my...
Or they've paid a certain amount of money to be able to visit Earth for a little bit. Here, put this suit on. Make sure you got your red eyes in the right place.
Let me put a new battery on you so your eyes are red enough. But I think that is something that, with Mothman at least, you don't hear very much about. You don't hear interdimensional being, alien associated with Mothman. Nowadays, with Bigfoot, you hear interdimensional being like within the last 5-10 years. Yeah. Mothman, at least from what I've read, no one's ever really talked about it being an interdimensional being or anything. Yet, if you read John Keel's book, there were beings that were human but not human that showed up in Point Pleasant after the Mothman was sighted. And I'm talking about Indrid Cold, or Indrid Cold.
Indrid, I believe, yeah.
Indrid, yeah, and the Men in Black, who seem to be very pale and robotic in nature. Interesting that those things appear, but when people mostly talk about the Mothman, they don't draw the connection as much. Right. Like it's a loose pet. Indrid Cold is like, hey, I lost my Mothman. Anybody seen it?
There's also the UFO sighting. So I would think, as opposed to interdimensional, if anything, they're thinking about otherworldly to some extent from a spaceship of sorts. If we back up a little bit, I would think, given the information that I've heard, again, all secondhand through podcasts such as this, much more likely that Bigfoot would be a biological creature than Mothman.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I would
We haven't even mentioned Mothman maybe is a robot or something.
100 miles per hour, gliding. Why not?
Yeah. Could be robotic in some nature.
Well, and to support what you just said there, one of the earlier witnesses around Point Pleasant it supposedly swooped down and looked at her through the windshield of her car, and she had to go to the hospital to have treatment on some sort of a extreme light injury. It's the same kind of injury that happens to one's eyes when they see some really bright or intense light.
Like
that's what happened.
Arc welding or something. You can
something like
burn
that,
your corneas. Yeah.
And I was reading some of the summaries of what Keel had said in his book. Apparently, a lot of times when folks have UFO sightings, they sometimes have that same instance as well. With the woman who saw the Mothman, she had the same issue with her eyes. And so that plays into your concept of maybe it's more machine than animal or being. Maybe it's a futuristic drone.
In the 60s, that would have been futuristic for sure.
Interdimensional drone that they're sending through.
The interdimensional drone. I had an interdimensional drone go over my house just a few minutes ago, or an hour ago now. But
you should file a police report.
Yeah, no kidding. So the Mothman in the 60s, none of this was happening. Now you're talking in the 2011s onward, because it's happened more than once. There's cameras everywhere. There's weather cameras on top of tall buildings in Chicago. None of them have caught the Mothman, I guess.
Or they had, and they decided not to show.
That's what bothers me. We have all this technology. It's been deployed, right? And there's still so many holes in the coverage.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things that AI could solve easily. If you said, I want an AI that just watches all of the cameras that are publicly accessible in Chicago to get me a picture of this goddamn Mothman.
Yeah.
There's no reason. There's no reason why it can't happen. The technology exists currently to do that. So basically, economics is ruining all our fun. We can't actually catch this thing because it's economically not feasible.
Well, you could dance into the whole conspiracy theory side of things and talk about that. There is information out there, and the folks who sort of have a chokehold or a throttle, at least, on what makes it out into the general public. Same reason the Men in Black show up and take away the Bigfoot you ran over accidentally one night while driving home, and when you go back the next morning to pick it up, it's gone.
Yeah. Got cleaned up. Yeah.
Got cleaned up somehow. The big black SUVs with the tinted windows.
Right. And now with satellite imagery, they can read a license plate from space. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The Mothman's bigger than a license plate.
It is true. I don't think he has a license plate. But.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Why don't we have a picture of the Mothman butt flying through the air? Because you can zoom in that far.
And maybe we do. Maybe they're sitting around every day in the Oval Office and they scan all the Mothman shots they've got.
I got a new briefing for you on the Mothman, sir. Now, I hope maybe you'll get to go back to your little town in West Virginia and stop by the Mothman Museum or something sometime soon.
I would love to drag my family back there and make them see where I grew up, and definitely stop by Point Pleasant.
Just as an aside, there's another one called the Flatwoods Monster that's actually close to there as well.
I've heard the name. I don't recall the story.
Yeah, and it's totally doesn't look anything like the Mothman.
Okay.
You look up Flatwoods Monster. It happened in a little town, and everybody, again, the poor people who saw it were ridiculed, but they saw what could have been a robot, could have been an alien, looked really, really weird, and scared the bejesus out of them and their kids in the woods.
A much better name than the Van Meter Visitor. The Flatwoods
You think?
Monster.
I love Van Meter Visitor.
You do?
Yes, I think it's the greatest.
I mean, a visitor could be just somebody coming in from a different town.
I thought it would be great for their local team, the local high school team, to be called the Visitors. So then they're always the visitor. It's visitors versus the visitors, or there's no home team. It's always the visitors.
That's a good idea.
I don't think they're going to go for it, though. They seem to be very resistant to the visitor. Van Meter is
when the
not too
festival's
far
in
from the capital of Iowa.
Okay.
You should go. You should go there too, but that's not
I'm
really
making
a
a list.
destination for you. There's nothing else to take you there.
Putting pins in my map of the U.S. right now.
Yeah, Flatwoods Monster, Van Meter Visitor, Mothman. I mean, it goes on and on. Champ. Have you ever been to Lake
you mentioned
Champlain?
Champ in New York.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Lake Champlain. It's on Vermont, New York. I've been there too.
So you've been making the rounds. You've got a definite interest.
That one wasn't on purpose. Well, it was on purpose. We were on vacation in Vermont and went to Lake Champlain and had lunch on the lake and have the Champ stuff there and so forth. But I didn't intentionally go there to see Champ like I did to go see the Mothman.
Is there a Champ statue?
Yeah, they have a Champ statue, and you can buy trinkets, tchotchkes.
Van Meter Visitor?
No, there's none of that. No tchotchkes. I have a brick. I can't believe you listened to this. It's been the Mondo Freako Basement Tapes. If you've enjoyed this glimpse into the origins, you're going to really want to check out the regular show. All kinds of weird topics, but maybe a little more polished.
You can find Mondo Freako on all major podcatchers and social media platforms.
See you next show.
You freak.
I'm not sure I'm going to ever hit the duration of your podcasting.
Oh, you're going to be dead by then? Is that what
I'll be dead.
And so he's full of frivels.
Yeah, we need a frivol cleanse.
So I'm in St. Louis, and I just call it the city most of the time. I'm like, I got to go into the city. Some people call it the loo. The loo sounds like the bathroom. Go into the loo, love.